I think wilderness or this special combination of a very high biodiversity and a beautiful landscape that you have here in Romania that starts exactly there. You don't have everything paved, not everything is used by square meter. There's a lot of space for all kind of other wildlife and other species, and that makes it so outstanding.
That's Barbara. She and her husband Christoph are two of the most inspiring people we've ever met. Our paths first crossed right here, and then took us here to their home in the heart of the Carpathian Mountains. I heard so much about them making my way around what I now consider Europe's best kept secret. A place where my concept of wilderness took an entirely new dimension, trailing the crest of the Fagarash range. The Carpathians are one of the very rare places in Europe where you can walk, hike, or ride truly immersed in nature and wildlife and forests, peak after peak for days on end. There's only a single road across this entire area, and it's closed half the year. And this, basically, from here to here and here, is what Barbara and Christoph are trying to protect. It's not really about these lines on the map, though. It's about the life, hiding around every curve and fold and bend. All this life that they impact. Not just the 120 people they employ in conservation, or even the thousands living in and around the Carpathians. It's everyone, current or future, everyone who needs the last virgin forest in Europe to breathe. It's also the lives of animals, trees, plants, fungus, and insects who thrive in them. And not to mention their 2 daughters and 43 horses, and Basta, Mikosh, and Alfie, and Lenny, Mio, Bernie, Remo, Mick, Muck, Tiggerstern, and Fat Louie, and all the other pigs, chicken, and geese who share their home. We came to visit them at this house that they built 17 years ago. We had a scrumptious dinner, picked and cooked straight from their garden, with zucchini potato soup, fresh peas, and roasted sweet potatoes, and even homemade ice cream with milk from their neighbor's cow. The next morning, we went on a very windy and beautiful walk in between horses and ravens and cows. Since I realized that we all come from the same mountain range, I wanted to know what made the mountains and forest here so special to them, or at least special enough to make them stay for 28 years.
If you're walking here, you will always find signs of bears, signs of wolves, of lynx, and this makes the forest really alive. Whereas if I go in a place like in Germany, I might see a roe deer, I might see signs of red deer, but that's it. There's so much missing in these forests.
What Christoph said about the forest is of course true, but for me it starts already outside the forests. If you look at Germany and Austria, everything is so tamed. Next to the road you have already, if the asphalt, you have maybe 50 centimeters of something green, and then you already have the cornfield.
This map and space and amount of uncharted territory is exactly what makes a wilderness preserve ideal here.
It's a magnitude. The average European national park is something like 15 to 20,000 hectares, which means, you can easily walk through it in one day. What we want to create is a wilderness reserve that you stand on top of a mountain and it stretches from the horizon to the horizon. And if you walk along the crest of the Fagarash Mountains,
yes, which I know,
then you get to see not even a quarter of the whole Fagarash Mountains from the one side to the other side, because there's so much more in the south that you don't see.
I think what it makes the Fagarash Mountains also so special is that you're not just protecting, like you do in other countries, a crest or something that is not being used anyway, but something that has a very high production. So we're talking about not just the crest, we're talking about the forests around it, also going from low altitudes to very high altitudes. And that also means these areas will be resilient enough and able to counteract all these challenges of climate change, because you have this altitude shift and all the species have enough space to move and to adapt to the new situation. And this makes very big landscapes so important also for the future.
In the spirit of Unfinished, which is really about non-stop learning, I couldn't help asking them about the many different lives they seem to manage all at once.
For sure, it's, if I look back, whatever, 25 years ago, if somebody would have told me that I would end up, having a horse farm or be the director of a big foundation, right. I would have laughed because. But then I was dreaming only about, research going after animals in really wild places. That solitary, it was a very big part of my life. But then you also come to crossings in your life and you take decisions. You can also change, and it's something that is quite important for yourself. But also you develop further and further, and you realize you might have a bigger impact doing something else than doing what you have done for the past 10 years.
Making a national park is such a complex thing. We have to work with forests, with animals, with people, with laws. Founder of the so-called wildlife management. Wildlife management is nothing else than people management.
I think this is where we also had to get a bit out of our comfort zone, because it's very easy to spend days and days in the forest, but it's a completely different story when you have to interact with people and people have different opinions. You have to first listen and understand where the problems are before you can maybe come up with ideas to solve it, or to at least have a mutual understanding about how you can go on.
Their work at Conservation Carpathia reminded me once more of this midnight moment our planet is in, and the emergency and transformation such a moment demands. I wondered if they could identify a single moment where they decided to make this big turn towards conservation, which in some paradoxical way is perhaps the ultimate transformation.
I think that was not one moment, that was a gradual thing in our lives. I mean, we have both been growing up in rural areas. We've both had always a big interest in nature and wildlife. So we never saw the research outside conservation context. I mean, what came gradually was that we incorporated more of these changes in life that you have just mentioned that we all have to do in order to survive, basically. That we incorporated that into our own lives. I mean, when we started our riding center here, for example, initially we were still relatively unconscious about the food that we would serve. We just went into the supermarket and bought whatever we found. We started to realize actually it's not good. So we started to implement more and more of this understanding into our own daily life, which means like we are producing now a lot of the food ourselves. So we're working with local farmers. We have the Roma communities here that go in the forest and they pick mushrooms or they pick berries, buy it from them. Actually, things that are relatively small, minor. But if you put them all on one pile, it becomes the change that we need. It's not about, that you can sit down and say, now I change my life.
Yeah.
Because nobody's able to do that. You have to change a zillion different things. And they're often very small changes. You go to work by bike instead of taking your own car. You decide, to go to Germany not by plane or by car, but by train. You eat different things. You don't eat whatever fruits and vegetables throughout the whole year. You look much more on seasonality. You look at where this stuff comes from, how it is being produced. These are things that just, happen gradually in our own lives. And we, at the same time, by starting to develop this national park, we also learned that we really need a holistic approach there. They have to look after nature, after animals, after people. And you get deeper and deeper into the roots of what is actually wrong in our systems and what we have to change.
I think it's also, I also can't say that there was one single moment that was mind-changing, but you live and learn, and you watch what's happening. I think what came over time is this realization that if there is not a big change happening very soon, we're gonna have doomsday. That is very clear, and it's just trying to find a way how to change it and how to make this change possible for all of us. Because as Christoph said, you can start in your own home and you can do a lot of good things. Unfortunately, this will not be enough to really hold this process that is going on now. Besides that, we also need real political changes, some changes that will be probably painful for all of us because all changes hurt for a while until you adapt to a new situation. But I think it's really necessary. We won't manage without changing many things.
Naturally, during our walk, we came across numerous treasures of nature.
Yeah, droppings. And
grass and a few berries.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't a big
From
bear.
the night, you think?
No,
that's already a little bit older. There's quite a fresh one on the other side. Look how many apples are there now.
Oh, yeah.
It's really cool. The bears are having a feast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they really have a very diverse diet.
Yeah, bears are omnivores. They can eat pretty much everything, and but they do like. Most of them are quite vegetarian.
And speaking of bears, I couldn't resist asking them about all this bear babble.
See, people ask us often, what should we do if we meet a bear?
Yeah.
And our standard answer is, take out your mobile phone and take a picture before it's gone.
Perfect.
This is, if you have here a bear that is living in its natural habitat, and there's not something special that you surprise a mother bear with the cubs and she gets scared and wants to defend her cubs, or that a bear is in a den and you stumble over the den and he gets scared or something. Bears always want to run away from people. They don't want to. They're scared of people. It's of course a different situation if you have bears that are used to going into the garbage bins around the hotels or so, and they lost their fear and they know that this is a place where you get food. So these are different situations. But if you're out here, if you would see a bear now, some bear over there, he would run away immediately. I mean, we actually here when we're out, we come across bears quite regularly. It's not something that happens only once a year.
It's also we grew up, our children here, and they had ponies when they were little, and we were never ever worried that they would get into trouble with wildlife or bears specifically. But we would have been terrified letting them go alone down into the village on the road, because the risk there is probably 1,000 times higher than out here.
Put this way, bear fear sure looks a lot like a mere dead end. Or maybe it's all smoke and mirrors to keep our eyes away from something much worse happening.
Most important difficulties are the economic interests. It's not an awful lot. I'm not talking about the rural population. I'm talking about a couple handful of people. Those that cut forests on a large scale have made millions, overnight, not obeying to the law, and cut the whole mountainside down, and they went home with €1 million. People that make a lot of money with trophy hunting on bears, that sell dozens of trophy hunts every year. So if we come and we propose a different way of dealing with the land, they of course they dislike that, because we are destroying the basis of their economic well-being. And their economic well-being is of course based on something very short-term, very egoistic, something that doesn't have a future, which isn't sustainable. We are dealing with a very powerful enemy. People that are linked very well to the political class, people that are linked to the Secret Service. So they're powerful. It is a long battle, but I'm worried, we're not scared. We will win this battle, I'm sure, because it's simply the Romanian people are going to learn more and more that what's happening out there is totally against their own interests. Every year there's more and more support for protecting the forest and using them in a different way.
There's another challenge as well, and that is with being convincing enough for local communities that this change is worth it. Whatever we want it now, and we don't want to wait for 10 years or for 20 years. If somebody promises a better life, you actually want to have it now. The problem is that if you want to build up something new, this always takes time. And this is where I see the biggest problem, because of course going away from using these natural resources intensively, where you have immediate profit, but you might not have it anymore in the future. Changing that to something where you maybe have to step down a little bit now, first build something up and then have a good life later on is not easy. In the long run, of course, it's more beneficial, and we are all convinced about that, not only for local communities but also for society in general. But making this change and making it economically interesting, that is the big challenge.
Our biggest advantage is that we don't have an economic interest. We don't do this kind of calculation. Our opponents, they have no interest to help people. It's just a cost factor for them. It doesn't bring them anything. Whereas for us, it is relatively easy to invest money into helping people, because if that's the way forward, then we can do that. We raise the money and we help people, and we see that these people have a better life, and through that realize that conservation is actually something good for them.
Christoph and Barbara's teams are replanting around 100 hectares of forest every year since 2013. They're pretty much replanting non-stop, even when they're in landscapes so rough that trucks can't access the clearings and they've got to carry saplings themselves.
Usually for our replanting activity, we have about 100 people out there, so more and more locals came and started to replant. And I think that also gives a bit of ownership back to the people, because they know they have been planting this forest. They don't want to see it destroyed anymore.
And it was also that most of the people that came to plant were Roma, which helped additionally because they usually have they're socially the lowest. They have the most economic difficulties. They're having a hard time to make a living. So giving them the opportunity to plant in spring, and then during summer, they have to go out and cut the grass around these saplings, and then in autumn again the planting. So they could basically live more than half of the year just from this whole planting activities.
Okay.
And that helped them a lot, and it also helped all the other ones, because automatically, if somebody doesn't have any way to economically survive, then people tend to start stealing or doing other stuff.
Yeah.
And so since they had an economic base, it was, by the end, it was good for everybody.
And aside from already replanting well over 3 million trees and protecting 65,000 hectares of wilderness from hunting, Conservation Carpathia is also known for having reintroduced some very particular species.
Well, bison were gone from Romania for over 200 years. For more than 100 years, they're gone in the wild from all over Europe. All the bison that you find now in Liberty, they go back to a very small number of bison that were kept in enclosures.
With the bison, you often get asked, what are bison good for? Why do we need them? I think, is a total wrong question, because this is not our planet.
Right.
It's not that we own it and we can decide who we allow in or who we not allow in. It's a planet of everybody. So the question is not what are they good for? The question is
why they're not here anymore.
why they can't be here. And if there is no reason why they can't be here, they should be here. So we have to do everything to bring them back.
Plus there's, of course, some species that are really having a big impact on the entire system, more than others maybe, so-called keystone species. And the bison and also the beaver are both species that will accelerate the process of rewilding, and we were also focusing on those two, because with them you get a lot of other species that are thriving. The beaver is a real landscape architect. So it's famous for creating its own habitat, and with it changing the landscape and making new microhabitats for a lot of other species. The bison pretty much the same. By being a large mammal and roaming these forests, is creating open areas. It's also an architect, maybe not as obvious as the beaver, but has the same function.
The bison, is just really disturbing this habitat, and there's nothing worse than uniform habitat all over. So if you have like a spruce plantation, that's basically a dead area. There's very, very few species. If you have an area that has a lot of disturbance, there's all kind of small places for some beetle, for some birds, for some specific flowers. With these flowers, again, other species and so on. So the more micro-disturbed an area is, the better it is.
I can't lie. I love thinking of bisons and beavers as artists. They're much more talented than most human artists anyways, and we've got a lot to learn from them about how difference and micro-disturbance makes us more resilient. And although our conversation felt so unfinished still, we wanted to end by asking Barbara and Christoph about their long-term horizon. Their vision is pretty clear.
Just if you look at the big corporates, I mean, even during the year of the pandemic in 2020, there was a number that have declared that they want to be net zero until 2030 has tripled. So we know that you can decrease a certain amount of your emissions, but there's always a baseline that you cannot increase any further. They'll always be there. So offsetting them is the only possibility. So the forests suddenly get a huge value for this kind of offsetting, and we will see such a run. And the carbon credits will be growing in prices, in value, a lot, because there will be so much demand and just a certain amount of possibilities. So I think that the landowner today, forest owner today, should stop cutting and protect his forest, because it's economically much more interesting. We have had some very large landowners, very, very large, amongst the sort of the top 10 largest landowners that came to us and said, we want to learn from your example, and maybe this is something we might get interested in the future. So this is the trend, and I'm sure that in 5 years from now, there will be a lot of forests under protection because of that.
So once they have the Făgăraș National Park, that can become an example for Romania, and that can become an example for Europe, and that can become an example for anywhere. So with every purchased land and every tree planted, every bear protected and forest owner converted, every road prevented and job created, every zucchini garden a rescued kitten, they're slowly and patiently building a beautiful blueprint for something much larger and wilder, basically drawing a roadmap for anyone to follow.